Paul Millard, welcome to Dirtbag Rich.
I love it. Excited to be here.
I want to start with a really easy question. What is work?
Well, I've written like over 100,000 words in two books on this, so I'm not done answering it yet. I want to write more books about work, but the way I've increasingly thought of work is that with a really simple phrase, things worth doing. And I think there's a lot tied into that phrase. And um, Yeah, I'll just start there. And maybe we can just riff a bit. Like
Yeah.
where does what I'm sure you have questions with that
Oh,
short
I've
answer.
got questions. Things worth doing. Who gets to decide what is worth something?
Yeah, and so I think in our world, we are sort of coming out of this industrial world in which our governments and companies and leaders had complete domination over the definition of work, which I think was formal employment, right? And I think even starting in the 70s, there was pushback on this. There was a movement called Wages for Housewives, right? And within the frame of formal employment, they were trying to say, okay, let's acknowledge more types of work, like caregiving kind of work and things like that, not just things for money. And I think we've continued along that trajectory, a little moving away from work as formal employment and sort of proof as membership in society toward all the things worth doing. In my personal life, I see taking care of my daughter, which I did for the first half of today, as work. I see writing as work, even though for the most part, that usually doesn't directly generate money. I see paid employment and contract work as work. And I think the key with that and the healthy way of doing it is also pairing that with a lightness. So I think it's really tricky to start seeing everything as work and also pair that with the idea that work is your identity. It is everything. It says everything about you. And so I think a lot of my evolution has been going from seeing work as this, oh, you have to do it. It's your duty. You must do it in formal full-time jobs to, hey, there's a lot of things I do as work. Some of these things give me more or less meaning, and the combination of them lead to kind of a full and thriving life.
Okay. I've also noticed this expanding envelope of what we consider work, and then there are debates about how it should be compensated. Let me flip this around. How do you know if something is not work? Is there a definition for that?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Keynes's essay, but have you read Bertrand Russell's In Praise of Idleness?
A long time ago, but you'll have to refresh me.
He has a really good definition of work. Let me see if I can um, pull that up real quick. But I think his definition was basically like, yeah, what is work? Work is of two kinds. First, altering the position of matter or at or near the Earth's surface relative to other such matter. Second, telling other people to do so. Um, and so, and so like I love that definition. Um, the first really encompasses everything, right? Moving the position of matter um, relative to other such matter. That could be bits, that could be physical objects, that
It could be
really
poop off of your kid's butt.
exactly. Um, and so it's this, I love that sort of definition because it's like, oh, let's just relax, right? And not take it so seriously. And I think in our world, have you read Byul Chun Han? He's a Korean philosopher.
No, and you can just keep naming cool people who I haven't read. That's fine, Paul. Go ahead.
He wrote the book called Burnout Society. And he argued that we live in something called an achievement society. And so we've sort of taken that really broad definition of work and then narrowed it down and layered on top of this idea that we always need to be improving, growing, achieving, evolving, right? And so the downside of that is if your narrative on top of what work means says you need to keep achieving, you need to keep doing, you need to keep collecting more money, progressing, all these things. If you stop doing that, you're a failure, right? And so I think one, what is work? Let's define it super broadly. But then two, I think an area I'm more interested in is around like what are the work scripts we have about defining what that work actually means. And I think that's where people get into a lot of trouble and also can find a lot of space for moving toward a more flourishing life.
You recently published a book called Good Work. Can you briefly tell me what the difference between work and good work is?
For me, the good work is the stuff that brings me alive. It's the stuff where I feel a sense of connection, not only to myself, I feel it to something bigger, right? There's this lar it's hard to describe, right? There's this connectedness to some sort of like universal. And people have been talking about the creative act being a portal to this forever, right? You can find this throughout history, people talking about creativity and really connecting to something deeper, whether it be God, something spiritual, something universal, something cosmic. And for me, writing has been a portal to that. And it's an activity in which when I do it steadily, I feel good. When I pause doing it, I feel as if something is missing in my life. Now, to also make good work more clear, it's very obvious to point out what is bad work. Bad work sucks our energy. It makes us feel cynical. It makes us feel not whole. We are uninspired. We want to escape it. It is physically draining, emotionally exhausting. And so everyone, when they hear those things, can typically define, oh, I know what my bad work is, right? You might hate numbers and math, and therefore, like playing the role of an accountant would be really bad work for you, right? Other people, writing is that bad work for them. And so the challenge and what I'm really encouraging people to do is become clear about what you don't want to do. Start noticing when you feel a sense of connection to your work, some sort of alignment, some sort of excitement, some sort of energy you're feeling that you want to stay connected to, and then take the bold challenge to try to build more of your life around that over time, which for me has been a journey of the last 7.5 years. And it's been an up and down journey. It's been challenging. It's been incredibly rewarding. And it's a journey I expect to stay on for the rest of my life.
You came from a fairly high achieving background. You went to a very competitive college. You worked for, I believe, the top consulting firm in the United States, McKinsey, and other consulting firms. And you were essentially at the top of your game. You were not leaving any money on the table, Paul. What, please just so we can bring this down from philosophy level into concrete level, like give us the quick version of your story and how you ended up on this 7.5 year path.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say you come from a very high achieving past because it doesn't quite feel like that. I grew up, my parents didn't go to college. My dad worked in the same job his entire life. I think the work reality I grew up with was that work is something to be tolerated and you just sort of like put your head down and keep showing up. And so I never really was fully in the mode of I am optimizing for achievements. I think I ended up on that path, one, because I was just really good at school and really good at sort of like decoding how to find jobs and break into impressive careers. And I think a lot of my energy in that world was driven toward trying to like simultaneously keep moving and also trying to escape. Like there's got to be a better way. I don't really love what I'm up to or where I'm headed. I got to keep just moving and changing jobs. And so I actually did leave a lot of money on the table too. Like people see I worked at McKinsey and they sort of assume I have like millions of dollars in the bank because of that. I actually took a pay cut to join McKinsey from GE. So I was making about 55,000 a year out of college at GE, and I took a pay cut down to 48,000, I think, to join GE. And
To join
so
McKinsey?
yeah, and so early on, I was really just optimizing around learning. I was so bored and so disillusioned at GE. It was basically just this huge company where everyone had kind of just accepted mediocrity. And everyone around me is like, well, this is just work. What do you expect? And I think I had this fire inside of me that wanted more, that wanted to find challenge. And so I desperately tried to break into the consulting world. And McKinsey was literally the only firm that gave me an offer, which weirdly, yeah, like you said, it's one of the top ranked firms in the world. But yeah, I went there and I really loved it at first. It was such a good environment. People were driven. People were challenging each other. People did want to help me succeed and grow. And I loved that. Except what I felt about 2 years into that path was I'm kind of bored. I'm not as challenged anymore. And I kept having this urge for the next 7 years, basically, to keep moving. I want to escape this current situation, find a better situation, keep evolving and growing. And I think I know now I had this deep desire to be challenged in like hard ways, something I've been able to channel in writing. But I just kept moving. Like I went from McKinsey to business school and went into debt. And then when I came out of business school, I had kind of had this awakening of like, I don't really love what I'm doing, but shit, now I have this debt. I have to kind of keep moving. And as soon as I took another job in consulting after graduation, I paid off my debt as soon as possible and started building savings. And I think as soon as I started building savings and paid off my loans, I just started to come up with more ideas about the potential future path of my life. And eventually, after 5 years of 5 years after business school, I did decide to quit and take the leap to work on my own.
Why? Why did you quit? What, I mean, you sound like you were achieving, you were earning money, you were doing everything right. Like, why leave?
It all seemed pretty pointless to me, to be honest. I also started to notice that I was not like the other people around me. Other people loved what they were doing. And when you love what you're doing, it's easy to work long hours. It's easy to endlessly work on PowerPoint slides. But if you don't really love it anymore, like I was good at it, I could do it, but it took so much startup and activation energy just to get started working on any kind of project. And so, yeah, I just sort of like ran out of steam to keep going. It was it was something that sort of snuck up on me too. I think I had started dabbling on the side with creative projects and writing for about 3 years before I quit. But by the end, I was basically just in a bad situation with a boss that I just wasn't getting along with. And I was very frustrated at this insane project I was working on for 2 years, and grown men just wouldn't make decisions on it. And it happened sort of accidentally. I emailed my boss frustrated at him one day and I was like, I think I should just leave the company. And he took it as my resignation. Um, which it wasn't intended to be, but
Hmm.
as soon as I realized he interpreted it as that, I didn't push back at all. I just sort of like let things go in motion. And a couple of months after that, I was just unemployed and didn't really have a plan. My loose plan was to be a freelance consultant, but I didn't end up making any money on my own for about 3, 4 months.
At what point did you leave the US and travel and live abroad for a while?
Yeah, so after I quit my job, about 3, 4 months to like find some projects, I ended up finding 3 or 4 different clients. I did make some money, at the same time, I was radically lowering my cost of living because when you don't make any money and you're just spending money, it's pretty obvious like what you need to do. So I started making money, stabilized, but I was still living pretty cheaply. And I took a trip abroad about 9 months after I quit my job in Asia. And I don't know, I just felt called to sort of wander. I think I was craving really deep down a season of solitude, of reflection, of getting lost in my life. And during that 1 month trip to Asia, I spent some time in Taiwan. And for some reason, I just had this powerful sense that I had to come back. And so returned to the US, started telling friends, okay, I think I'm going to go back to Taiwan, started getting rid of my stuff and booked a flight to Taiwan and booked an Airbnb for 2 months and really had no plan after that and just decided I'm going to go there. Um, and there was some degree of like excitement. Maybe you can relate to this. I mean, you've wandered all over the world, but there was excitement of not knowing. It's like, man, I have no plan and this is fucking awesome. Like, I've had a plan for the last 15 years of my life. I'm ready to just like screw around and find out.
What did you find out?
Yeah, so I think within a month, um, I think quickly arriving, I just for the first time had the sense that I was on the right path. I didn't feel like I needed to escape. I slowed down my life dramatically. I was living on less than 1,000 a month. I was eating simply. I was living simply. I was just waking up and wandering. I was reflecting, writing, reading, and everything just felt nice. And I think in that first month, I started to develop a connection to writing. And it sort of emerged out of nothing, doing nothing, that, oh, this is something worth doing. This is something that can help me make sense of my path. This is something worth doing in itself. And I sort of decided just to commit to it then in Taiwan. And for some reason, I think that was a powerful enough anchor to like, give me confidence to keep going on this uncertain path. And then soon after, I basically met my wife, which was just this really wild experience of, okay, I'm just opening up myself to anything. And within a couple of weeks, I'd sort of like fallen in love with writing and fallen in love with this woman. And once these things happen to you, you can't really look at life the same anymore.
Hmm.
Like, I know how to come up with a plan and go after it, but I also know that I should probably approach life now to make sure I have space and sort of let things emerge and let answers come to me rather than trying to like pre-solve them.
I know from listening to some of your podcasts, Paul, that you did have a bit of a background in writing blogs in college, Quora and LinkedIn posts um, later on in life. So it seems like you had a bit of a foundation there, but I actually want to ask about your love life. Were you looking for someone to marry? Were you looking for love actively, or did she really just stumble into your life and take you by surprise?
I think deep down I craved that, but part of me had sort of given up. I think maybe too many dates. Um, really never found somebody I'd connected with. I think I'd been single for about 7 years when we met. And for many years, I just like never really found anyone I connected with. And part of that I realize now was I wasn't honest about what I desired out of life. As soon as I quit my job, I started meeting people that I connected with much better. And yeah, I think as soon as I met her, there was no single moment where I ever felt the desire to like not be in this situation. It just felt so powerfully obvious that this was meant to be. Um, it's hard to describe. I
Can,
probably need to get better at writing to even bring this alive. But yeah, I deep down, I think I craved a partner and building a life and building a family. That's always been important to me. But part of me had also completely let go of that at the same time in a
Mm.
way that I think enabled it to show up.
Was there a moment? Can you share an anecdote, a conversation, something that happened between you two in these first days or weeks of meeting that made you think like, oh, this is her?
I mean, one funny one was she calls me one morning, "Hey, I'm gonna skip work today. Do you want to go hiking?" And for me, it was just like an instant hell yes. I had been basically sort of practicing like deprioritizing work and pushing that as far as possible, like paid work or work toward like any sort of goals. And I think just that really signaled to me, hey, this is somebody that values quality time and is basically willing to do it to like is willing to like sacrifice like um reputation at work to do it too. And I don't know that I think that's just a really cool thing for me. Um and then I think it was just we were spending like every day together pretty quickly and there were just no games. It was just like very simple. I wanted to keep talking um to her and yeah, I don't know. It's hard to imagine before it happens, but everything just sort of falls into place.
So you were at the beginning of your career as a writer. I know you don't even like being called a writer. You write, active verb, you write. You do many other things too.
Yeah.
But you were at the start of your pathless path. And what about her? What about your future wife? What was her work situation? And did one of you need to like really change or adapt your lives to for them to fit together?
I think we're both in the active process of blowing up our lives, which makes for uh things to fit together pretty easily. I think I had no real plan after those 2 months in Taiwan. And so basically everything after those 2 months was an open like book I could basically write from scratch. And she was in the process of leaving her job and was transitioning to become a fitness trainer. So that's an in-person job in Taipei. So I basically just decided, yeah, I'll just come back. I have no plans still. And I think I was still in my season of like, what if I don't prioritize paid work and just do the things I care about? And yeah, I that was basically my plan for the year. I I dabbled with a bunch of stuff that felt fun and did get a couple small projects to make money, but I did the bare minimum money wise to like support that first year, 2019, living with her in Taipei.
In your book, you have charts of how much money you've made over the past 7 years. You're very open about your personal details, which I appreciate. And it was, yeah, pretty low income compared to, I imagine, other people in your cohort or your
Oh yeah.
background. And then in recent years, there was a bump. The curve changed its shape. And can you just talk about the response that you received after you put in all of this essentially unpaid time as a writer and a blogger? Talk about the so-called success story moment.
Yeah, so my book, The Pathless Path, took off in 2023. Yeah, it really it started selling a little more in 2022, the year I launched it. I did sell like 10,000 copies in the first year, which was pretty amazing. I think I made about $50,000 from it after spending about 7,000 creating the book. And so the second year it just sort of went bananas and I ended up making about 150,000 from the book, which was so wild. And is the first year I really ever made more than on my previous path. And this is a lot of people's goal when they leave their job. Like they think they need to replace their income before they leave. That was never my goal. I actually didn't think it was ever going to be possible given how I was approaching work. So it was really surprising. It's also really surprising and weird to experience making money from something that happened years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished my book in January 2022, and then I'm making a ton of money from it in 2023. Most of the writing happening in 2021 and influences and ideas and exploration happening from like 2018 to 2022. And so even today, I'm making money from the book. I'm sure you experience this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's very weird. And I think my takeaway from it is okay, there is some proof that like people like my writing and I might make money from it in the future. So therefore, I might as well do the work I'm most passionate about in the moment right now, right? And that is a huge shift from the calculus of I should work on the thing that makes the most money right now. And yeah, it's just given me further confidence to keep going on that path. And I would add my income has now dropped. This year is going to be quite a bit lower. Still pretty good, mostly because I'm doing some training and consulting projects for corporations to sort of like fund my journey. But yeah, I don't really know about next year. I think next year might be even lower than this year. So we'll see. And for the most part, all I did when I made more money is saved more, and that's just going to fund further crazy investments down the road.
The reason I wanted to get you on the podcast is because you really do seem to have this magical balance of money, time, and purpose. And you went through those many years of earning very little money in order to focus on your writing because it felt extremely purposeful to you. And then, and how much of this is due to, hard work, how much of it is luck and nice breaks and connections. You were able to make quite a nice amount of money from something that you did purely out of passion. And you've made this point many times over. Like you would have written that book no matter what happened, no matter if no one was going to buy it. And so you have. I'm sure this is why you've become so popular online, Paul, because it really is this magical combination, this trifecta that you seem to have landed on. And I want you to tell me now, in what way is this a false story? Like, what do people not see when they read your book and they encounter your story and they see that you made $150,000 from writing a self-published book? What are they not seeing? What do people miss when they hear these kinds of glorious stories?
Well, I think they usually a lot of the people that have started following me in the last couple of years, they don't actually see how crazy I was. And it's funny, I think people should go back and read my early newsletters. And
Mm,
it's even funny reading it for me. Like I have the same strategy and the same formula as I did then. And so right then, like even in 2018 in Taiwan, I'm saying like, okay, I'm going to do the work that matters. I don't care if it makes money. If it makes money, that's cool. I'm going to be pragmatic about trying to make money, but like this is really the formula and strategy I'm using. I think it's really interesting now because people people don't actually want to just do the work they care about for 5 years without making money from it. And really longer in my case, it's probably about 7 years before I made money from writing because I wrote consistently in my final couple of years of work. And so they'll come to me and it's like, oh, how do you make money from a book? And so this is sort of the theme of this of good work. What I'm writing about is I don't know how to make money from a book. In fact, like my second book hasn't like is not as strong as like it's probably not like this month it's going to sell like 150 copies, but the first book is going to like outsell that, which is
mm,
wild.
mm-hmm.
Um, and so I just did a whole nother second book and it's not doing like super well out of the gate, right? So this month it's probably going to make like I don't know, maybe 100 yeah, maybe it'll make like $700. Um, and I spent like 9,000 on it. I'll probably break even early next year, but the second book may go to zero. I don't know. I don't know how these things work. But I spent the entire year working on that because it's the same formula I found 5 years ago in Taiwan, or I don't know, 6 years ago now. This makes me feel really good when I do it. And so I'm gonna keep doing it. And I have the support of my wife. She sort of sees how much it means to me. And we're both building our life around doing things like this because we want to be able to feel good about our lives, feel satisfied with the work we're creating, and also be able to inspire our kids to do the same in the future.
Let's take this conversation into the real life community and context of where you are right now, which is Austin, Texas. And you and I spoke earlier about how Austin and other places like that, where a lot of cool people show up who have sort of alternative livelihoods and unconventional approaches, how it's great to have those people in one place. But at the same time, it's still really hard if you are someone who's self-employed and in control of your time and you're like, hey, it's a sunny Wednesday afternoon, who wants to go for a hike? Or in your case, you have a young child, you're like, hey, where are all the other dads hanging out with their young kids, who let's hang out together? It's hard to connect with other people. Can you talk more about this, and then we'll circle back to the financial challenges of living in the United States?
Yeah, so I mean, you read about this too. Personal freedom, I think, is worth obtaining. I think a lot of people undervalue time freedom, and it's far more attainable than many people think, and usually isn't as much of a money problem as many people think, especially high wage Americans who seem to think everything in life is a money problem. Um, but the the challenge once you have freedom is the value of exercising that freedom is sort of limited by the other people around you exercising the freedom in the same ways, right? And so if you're free on a Tuesday, like so what, unless you're able to have like deep, meaningful conversations or connect in a deeper way with other people, or you're able to work on the things that matter to you, right? And so I'm a very social person, and I think that's been a hard thing in the US, as opposed to living abroad in like expat cultures, even Europe, where leisure is a higher value. It's like I bike around with my daughter, and it's mostly just like me and her, or me, my wife, and our daughter. And we struggle to find people that are like valuing that time freedom. I would say most US cities, people are valuing money um, and material objects higher. And that's fine. It's just the returns on actual time freedom are limited by the amount of people who also value time freedom.
You've done a pretty good job of building community online. You have this Pathless Path community. And so I know you've been able to meet lots of people remotely. But what are you doing about this in-person community, in-person connection challenge and obstacle? Like, what's your plan for this?
So I'm pretty good at it personally for one-off friendships. And I think the big shift for me is I definitely don't have the right people, parent wise. And so my wife and I are just spending a lot of time meeting people and sort of brainstorming like what are the experiments we could run. So over the next couple of years, we're probably going to lean a lot more in that direction, of finding other families that are doing this, potentially hosting month-long like residencies and stuff around the world in different places, maybe even long-term building our own sort of like community or hub somewhere. And yeah, that's basically been a shift in the last probably 3 or 4 months. And I don't have a good answer, but the question is, how do we build a life given our unique time freedom and location independence? right? And so I've married into um, a Taiwanese family. And so one of the sort of vows we made early in our relationship is we're going to find a way, no matter what, to spend quality time with both sides of the family throughout our life. And that basically leads to a fun challenge for us because we constantly get to solve that and come up with ideas. But yeah, we don't have a good solution to all this yet. We're going to basically just start experimenting more.
I know that one of the experiments you're about to run is leaving the United States and moving back to Asia. Tell me more about that.
Well, we're still trying to figure that out. I think we're always going to be connected to two different places. Um, right now, we're basically just sort of like thinking through where where are places we kind of want to like test out for the future. And I think Asia is really interesting for us, mostly because we'd love to just sort of make it really easy for our daughter to learn Chinese, her mother's native language, and also for me to learn Chinese as well. I think also spending time in Asia too, like children are really highly valued and families. And I think a challenge in the US is that kids and adults kind of live separate lives. It's it's weird sometimes to like bring kids to a restaurant. Whereas like even in Europe, I find that less so. There's always kids in the mix. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, this is more of like a big question of like what the next chapter of our lives looks like. And it's probably more unknown than it's ever have been. So I don't really have good answers about what's next.
Talk to me about the appeal of moving to a lower income country, bringing a US income, even if it's a low US income, to that country. Because I know that you are in touch with many people who take this approach. I am as well. You and I have each done this in our own ways. And I'm sure that that would make many things easier in terms of just having to produce, to earn less money, to pay for less stuff and have more time to then spend with family and writing, doing whatever you want.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't call it lower income country because in many countries there are high and low income jobs. I would call it more of like lower spend, different lifestyle countries. And so even within the US, there are very low cost places of living. I think it's actually a little underrated. Um, you can
Where are
live
some of
pretty
these places? Some just specific examples. I'm curious.
basically just leave the top 20 cities and you're there. I think the challenge, people like I love being around intellectual, curious people, right? And those people tend to sort to like high income cities in the US, right? You could move to like a random place in Alabama or North Dakota or Louisiana that are very cheap, right? But you're going to be in a rural town with maybe without the people you want to connect with. And so I think that's always the challenge. Moving abroad, I think there's just so many expats in cities. For some reason, there's just not really an expat scene in the US. I think most of the people that emigrate to the US are trying to like really make a lot of money or succeed in their careers, which makes sense. I think we're just like the best country in the world for careers and
Yeah,
success,
yeah.
innovation, and making money. And other countries value different things. And so in places in Europe, it's more relaxed, right? But there's downsides to that too. I mean, when I'm in Europe and Asia, sometimes I'm like, I wish people were like 10% more ambitious. But yeah, everything's trade-offs. And yeah, I mean, in Taiwan, you can live cheap. You can also live really expensively in Taiwan. I mean, you could spend more than I'm spending in Austin pretty easily living in Taipei, but you can also spend like 300 a month on an apartment. That is like good enough in Taipei as well.
Paul, let me drag you back into philosopher mode here.
Yeah.
And we started with the question of what is work and what's good work. Uh, since we're talking about different spending levels in different countries, tell me, what do you think money is?
Money. Yeah, I've probably thought less about money than work. I think money is clearly um sort of like the thing that is underneath so much in the modern world. Like I think so much of our world has been financialized, and I think money is really like this like the story we give money can be so powerful. I think the story I give money is that that is the thing I need to acquire to like purchase my freedom, which probably has some blind spots and is a limiting story in and of itself. But yeah, I think the trap of money is seeing money as like possessing money as really important versus seeing money as something that flows to enable life, right? And so I would lean much more toward that second definition. I don't really care about acquiring money and having it grow as much as possible. I think above a certain level, which is pretty low for me and my wife, it's really just um, above that amount. It's like, how do we enable the life we want to live versus how do we acquire as much as possible?
Let me ask a more pointed version of this question. Why is it that you can do a consulting gig and I assume get paid more than $100 an hour for your efforts, and then take that money and go to one of many other countries and receive, resources, goods and services, just an incredible number of goods and services relevant to the amount of effort, the amount of work that you have done, where someone from the receiving country, if they did a similar amount of effort and work and they took their money and they brought it to the United States, would then purchase a very low, minuscule amount of goods and services. What's your explanation for that global differential?
Yeah, so I mean I mean the economics definition is basically like higher value like you have like different industries, right? And different industries are able to establish different amounts of profits. And I happen to be born in a country in which it has more industries that are able to capture more profits, right? And so that that's probably like the simplest, that's my MBA brain
Yeah.
answer. And yeah, we don't really get to control where we're born. But the thing that has shifted in the last 30 years is that you can actually exit your economy in which you were born and have labor rights and enter sort of the global economy. And this has become increasingly easy for more and more people, which is really interesting. And so I think it's leading to more looseness around um, these things. And so one thing which was interesting is my wife was born in Taiwan, and so she had in her head an idea of like what she deserved to get paid, what an average wage was, and what X kind of people charge for X kind of service. And so she was doing a consulting project and she determined she should charge $4 an hour. Um, because that was sort of like the equivalent Taiwanese wage, but she
Hmm.
was working for somebody in the US in English. And I was like, one, like you can't charge that, like mostly because no one would take you serious charging that amount. Um, and she basically over a series of small projects went from like $10 to 15 to 25 to $50 an hour. And it was pretty fascinating to watch her go through this, mostly because of like how uncomfortable it was. And it helped show me like I've had my own journey with this too. I went from charging very low amounts to these trainings I do to very high amounts over basically 2 years. And a lot of times these what you can charge is arbitrary and is often limited by your own fears or your own conception of like what you're worth. And I think we're in an age in which this is more flexible and negotiable than ever. I mean, I meet people from India, from Philippines, from Pakistan, from all these different countries who are just deciding to compete in a different economy. I think one limit on that is you basically just need to learn English now to earn a high wage, mostly because a lot of the highest paid industries and most robust labor markets are English speaking places.
Yeah, there might be a few exceptions, like over here in Europe, speaking German or French might get you pretty
Yeah,
far.
definitely.
Yeah,
And if speaking Chinese, you can probably make good money working for a Chinese company.
yeah. The reason I'm asking you these questions is because I feel like this is the discussion that is often not happening underneath so much of these conversations around entrepreneurship, around creating a freedom business, around essentially doing something like what you've done or what I've done or other people I've interviewed on this podcast have done. And people need to be able to find some way to create a high amount of value in a way that is like uniquely like not too bad for them. Like it doesn't hurt them too much. It doesn't feel like they're destroying their soul or selling themselves out. Ideally, it feels like fun and it feels like meaningful, like a fun game that you're playing at the same time without doing it full time, without doing 40 hours a week or what many self-employed people do, which is 60, 70 hours a week, convincing themselves that all their effort is work when it's not because they're not actually doing something that other people value. And then finding a way to spend that money that is that where it won't all evaporate at once. And for some people that means spending it in some other country. But for like the more like dirtbag outdoor people, it means going and spending it rock climbing or hiking or surfing or doing some activity that essentially just requires that you have some free time and the energy and maybe like the friends you might need to do this thing and a little bit of gear. And so it's all this kind of elaborate game of arbitrage of like creating a lot of value and then figuring out smart ways to spend it at a very slow rate. Does this model that I'm throwing out here, does this map on for you
Oh
in your
yeah.
experience?
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't know it existed until I blew up my life and sort of accidentally put myself in a position where I had to really question my spending and lower it. And then after that, meeting people living in radically different ways. Like you mentioned, climbers, and surfers too. Like I met some surfers in Bali, and these people are so crazy. Like surfing is life for them. And so they will literally do anything to surf more, right? Live in their car. Um, like
Eat
work
tuna
it
fish every day.
right. I remember meeting this Australian person and they went and worked in Australia for like 2 months. They grind every day. They try to make as much money from tips. They don't spend any money within there. And then they spend all their money surfing around the world the rest of the year. Right. And so a lot of people will say, like, actually, the only people that ever say this to me are high wage American knowledge workers. They say, don't you think you shouldn't be talking about this? Like, because clearly everyone can't do it. And like, it sort of cracks me up because, okay, that might be true that literally everyone in the world can't live this
Yes,
white life,
granted.
but it's not a useful belief, right? Unless your whole goal in life is to not exercise that time freedom. But I would argue it is more possible for more people than ever. Like my good friend Jovian, I've done a podcast with him. He is Indonesian. He randomly went to a travel school in Indonesia that enabled him to study abroad in Taiwan. He learned Chinese. His first job out of school was he's making like $700 a month selling steel to Chinese people in Russia or something like this. And basically at night he would just like use the internet and he used the internet enough to like learn how to speak startup and landed a gig at a startup and like raised his salary. And then from there, he started applying to remote jobs. and he landed a job working for an entrepreneur in the UK. And he basically just needed like someone competent and ended up working his way into a path where he went from like several hundred a month to now he's earning like $5,000 a month doing remote work. And it's like these are the people that inspire me, um, and give me ideas for how to live life because they're seeing the possibilities. And I think often the most interesting stories I encounter are from the lower wage countries because the upside of possibility is actually like upside. Whereas like people look at my path and are like, oh, he went from 150 grand to 20 grand. That looks terrible. I don't want that. Right. But if you're able to go from 20 grand a year to 40 grand a year, that can be dramatically life changing in many, many countries.
I agree. And I like how you respond to the criticism of not everyone can do this by saying, yes, that is factually correct. But the important thing is to look at the delta, to look at the slope of change. And more people are able to do this. And so therefore it is okay. It is morally valid to laud this, even trying, even making an attempt towards this dirtbag rich or this entrepreneurial dream or whatever we're going to call it. Because, yes, many people will try and they will, I'm putting air quotes here, fail. They won't achieve this great height of success. But there are more and more people finding small versions of success. This is what I loved about Chris Guillebeau's book, The $100 Startup, which whenever people ask me for a book about startups or business, I still point them towards that one because he was like, hey, you don't need to create some multi-million dollar business. Just like find a way to spend a minimal amount of money, like $100, attempting to start some new business or venture or side project or whatever, and then maybe you can make enough money for it to earn half of what you were earning in your normal job that you kind of hate. Like that is success. Like if you can do that, you are still doing something that so many people, like you said earlier in the interview, Paul, it was just like work for a boss. It was just work for a job for so long. And so to even make $20,000 a year doing something that's kind of interesting to you is this incredible thing that is highly accessible to so many people. I'm going to throw a question at you here. You did not have any role models for this. You didn't have any role models for a creative life. Everything was about being in the corporate world and traditional metrics of success. Like, who inceptioned you, Paul? Like, where did you even believe that this was going to be possible for yourself?
Yeah, so I think starting in 2014, I got more, or podcasts just started becoming a lot more popular. And I was listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast, and I think all the people he interviewed sort of were incepting me, even though I didn't realize it at the time. It was really interesting how slow it took me, or how long it took me to actually quit my job. Even when I'm listening to people like Tim Ferriss, I never thought, oh yeah, that will be my path. I should blow up my life. Like I'm reading 4 Hour Work Week and not even like being like, oh, I should do this.
Hmm.
It was more like, oh, this is really cool. This is inspiring. And in some way, I was just short circuited for my own curiosity and interests. I was so deeply embedded in the full-time working world and I had success. So it was very hard to like talk myself into like not continuing on the path of success because once you're succeeding, you have more opportunities. Everyone in your life thinks you have things figured out. And so nobody's like, hey, what the hell are you doing? Like no one's doing that. But all my curiosity, I'm reading these books. I'm reading about Derek Sivers. I'm reading Alan Watts. I'm reading Tim Ferriss. And yeah, I think slowly those things probably did incept me. And they were sort of the role models that once I quit my job. But even still, like I struggle to find role models. I find people I take pieces from. I call them digital mentors. And often you don't even need to take ideas from them. Like I don't want to copy all of Tim Ferriss's life. like he doesn't have a partner or a family. So I struggle to relate to that part of him. But the way he approaches creativity and reinvents and does weird stuff, even deep into his career, that is really inspiring. That is something I can take from. And so I take pieces of how people are approaching their life.
A big theme in a lot of your writing and the stories that you tell is the internet, and especially the power of the internet to connect with people in faraway places and to be a self directed learner. And something I learned from one of your podcasts is that you did consider yourself a self directed learner who was pretty good with the internet from a pretty young age. Do you feel like this is something that you were kind of born into? Do you feel like this is something that people can learn? Or because I genuinely feel, and this is related to my work in alternative education, like I genuinely feel that this is the superpower is to be able to just research stuff and self-educate, but not just learn and gain information and teach yourself skills, but to like email random people on the internet and ask them to have a conversation with you or answer a question or use a website like Quora or Reddit to try to solve problems that people in your life can't solve. How do you see this?
Honestly, if I was born 30 years earlier, I think I would have just been miserable. Like, let's say I'm born and my parents didn't go to college, I probably would have had less opportunity. I maybe wouldn't have gone to college too. And I would have been this hyper curious human at my core, but not able to like find my community, find my place, find a job where I could actually express that. I think the internet has always just been a playground for me to follow my curiosity. I love like learning new things and exploring topics. I just went on a super deep dive around the history of the book publishing industry a couple weeks ago. There's no point to that other than like that sounds fun. And so I've always explored tools. Like I'm playing so much with AI now. I used to code websites when I was a kid. I did all these experiments. And so once social media was layered on top of that, I was able to find other people. And Twitter's not as much this now, but from 2018 to 2022, it was sort of this uh like golden age of all these other people like me who were finding each other. And it's like, oh shit, you spent your childhood playing on computers too, and like we're desperately curious about things. Like now we can be friends. This is awesome. And so, yeah, I'm just so grateful for it. Like, I really couldn't imagine. And the internet is like everything in my life is possible because of the internet. All the money I'm making now is because of the internet. I met my wife through Tinder. So like, I don't even know. It's it's crazy to even think about.
You are a product of your times.
Very much so.
I want to ask you about fear. And you mentioned earlier that, it's weird to earn money now from something that you created 6 months ago or 12 months ago. And this new book, Good Work, is not earning quite as much as maybe you hoped or dreamed it would. You're going to be earning less money this year. It's not this, this nice bar chart of constantly increasing income like it could have been if you stuck around the consulting world. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty that comes with the life that you've chosen. And I think this fear of uncertainty is paralyzing for so many people. And it takes quite a number of years of pushing through that to even consider that this is a sustainable long-term path. Like, how have you navigated the fear of uncertainty, and how do you navigate it today?
Yeah, so I think I think fear is very interesting on an uncertain path. I think on my previous path, fear fear of like the unknown is sort of a solved problem, and the narrative of stable employment sort of solves for that. It's also this like large agreement among all your peers to never really talk about the fact that you don't really know what's going to happen in the future. So you have these fears about the future, which are channeled into, hey, just get a job and like you'll be fine. You don't have to worry. On a path like this, I don't actually know. like what's going to happen. And I have proof of that by like things going not as planned or going better than planned even. Um, so I have constant proof that the future is uncertain and it's there. So like fear's there. Right now, I think I don't really know what's next. I'm going through this evolution now of trying to find somebody to run my. I'm working with this woman who's going to run some more of my consulting and corporate work I've been doing to shift even bolder into writing another book. And yeah, I'm a little afraid. But what I've learned is there's basically two choices. The choices is to like make a decision from the fear, which my fear would probably say, get a job, you dummy, right? And that doesn't sound fun for me. So the other option is take my fear with me, right? And grapple with it.
Hmm.
Really feel it. So I often go through this anytime I'm feeling like intense fear or uncertainty or afraid of the future, I just sort of like sit there with it and try to fully feel the emotion. And over time, it passes too. Never fully goes away. But I know I have all these mental models I've created of, okay, at the end of my life, am I going to be happy I listened to my fear or that I tried to grapple with it? Right.
Hmm.
And so over and over again, I've always made the choice of like stepping into the uncertainty, dancing with my fear, all these things and taking them along with me. And it leads to a surprising amount of peace of mind because it makes you realize so much of what we do in the world is to make our insecurities go away. Right. And so this is why I often come back and read books like Alan Watts's Wisdom of Insecurity. It's like, no, there's wisdom in the insecurity. It's telling us what we really want and a deeper truth about the inherent uncertainty of the world.
I think that's a great place to wrap up, Paul. Like, that's poetic. And I would love for you to now tell everyone how can they find out what you're up to, what projects you're working on, and what your books are? Where can they buy them?
Yeah, so you can go to pmillard.com. I link all my books there. And also pathlesspath.com I own because I thought that'd be fun to own that. And yeah, you can buy my books anywhere. I don't care where you buy them. If you don't have the money for the book right now and me gifting it to you would accelerate it up your wish list or to read list, I'm happy to do that. Just send me an email and I'm happy to gift you the digital copies, or if you really want, I will send you a physical copy too.
Wow. Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Awesome.